My name is Jordan Sims. I am a student at O'Fallon Township High School. We're interviewing Mr. John Anderson. Today's date is October 5th, 2015. We are conducting this interview at O'Fallon Township High School, Mill Run campus in O'Fallon, Illinois. Also participating in this interview is Alicia, Rossum, Brandon, Josh, and Christian. Now, I'd like to start off by saying, can you state your name for the records?
Yeah, I'm John Wesley Anderson.
When and where were you born?
I was born in a little town that's now underwater called Barkley Lake. The town was Katawa. It's named after an Indian chief, Kuttawa, in Kentucky. I was actually born in what soon became a retirement home. It was so small that the hospital portion of it closed and they made it an old folks home.
So what were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, before I entered, I was actually working as a draftsman for a company called United States Steel. And I drew beams, columns, things like that, structural integrity of them, things like that before I decided to go into service. It was either go in the Air Force or go in the Army. And I chose the Air Force. I thought the educational skills might be a little more transferable to civilian life when I retired or got out.
So why did you choose to go into the military and
Well, I was in the Vietnam era, and it was either get drafted or join. And I decided I didn't want to slug around carrying an M16 in the rice paddies with people shooting at me. So I elected instead to go into the Air Force, which for the most part you're pretty secure. You're on a base. And even though you might have been in Vietnam, I never got there, but even though you might have been in Vietnam, you're quite a bit safer than the guy that was out there in the field, like the Marines or the Army. So that's why I decided to go in voluntarily or get drafted. They had the draft back then, so.
So why did you choose to go into the Air Force?
For the job skills. I thought that was more transferable outside. When and if I got out, I wanted to be able to go in and have a career. So that's why.
So what are your feelings towards going into the military in the beginning compared to the end?
Well, when you go in, you're a kid. You're still a young person. And you don't have a lot of responsibility. So you go in, and the first day when your drill instructor walks up and introduces himself, and they pretty well tell you that your life no longer belongs to you, it gets scary. So when you first enter, you're scared. And when I finally got out, I knew some of the ropes and things like that, so it ended up being a good thing. But when you first go in, it's different. There's no mom and pop to run home to. You got your TI, and he doesn't like you very much at the beginning. They don't know you, and they don't know whether you're going to make it or not, so they intimidate at first. And when you later on, after you've known them for a while, when you're leaving basic, they shake your hand and tell you well done and stuff like that. So, it's going from not knowing much to having seen some of the world and know how things work.
So what was your main job when you were stationed in Thailand?
When I was there, I was a mechanic working on airplanes. So I worked on a little everything, B-52s, KC-135s, gunship 130s, and things like that. I was basically just keep them flying. It was right at the tail end of the war. I served probably 5 months there while the war was still active. So basically just keeping the airplanes flying, keeping the mission going as a mechanic.
Did you enjoy being stationed in Thailand?
Yeah, Thailand was a good experience. You find out how a lot of people in third world countries live. And, you know, there's a lot of people don't like the United States, but I tell you, after you've been in a country like Thailand, it has its good points, but you see how the regular citizens live, and it's not good. I mean, they live in shacks and things like that, so I enjoyed it because I did see a lot of nice, neat sights, pretty country, but you get to see a lot of things that are not very pretty too. So, would I go back? Yeah, I'd go back to Thailand. Luckily, not as a military guy.
So how would you describe the food in the military?
Well, when you're in basic training, you don't get to taste it. It's sort of like school, I guess. You have, what, about 10, 15 minutes to get your food down? So that was about the way the military was. You know, you shovel it down and you don't really taste anything. You're just thankful to be getting something, and that gives you a few minutes away from being told what to do otherwise. So later on, when you finally get out, I know my kids, I have one son that's in the military still, and they eat pretty good now. Food is really good. I mean, the cooks in the military have got to where they're almost chef quality now. So it's a lot better. When I first went in, not so good. So.
So how were your living conditions like in Thailand?
Open barracks, no air conditioning. Our group, there was 4 or 5 of us lived in the same immediate area of the open bay, and we went and bought a couple of fans, floor fans, to keep some airflow moving and things like that, but you have no privacy. I mean, there was none. Your open bay barracks, some of you will find out what that's like. It's sort of like being in one big classroom, except there's no desk. You got a couple of beds and chairs and things like that, but you have no privacy, so I'm glad to be out of that kind of situation. You know, when you want to sit there and write a letter, everybody's seeing what you're doing and that kind of thing. So it was okay. I'm just glad not to be in it anymore.
So where did you mostly serve in the military?
I had a very unique career. I spent 17 years at Norton Air Force Base in Southern California. I was in San Bernardino, just about 100 miles east of Los Angeles. That's where most of my career was spent. So my career was very confined. I was stationed in Norton, went to Grissom Air Force Base in Indiana, Utapao, Thailand, and then back to Norton, and that's where I stayed. I was in a career field that was considered specific, and there was only 4 bases I could have gone to. So, you know, my field was critical, so they put me in Norton, just left me there. Would have liked to see more of the world, but.
What were your specific duties in the Air Force?
Well, I started out as a mechanic, and then at about the 10-year mark, I decided either I was going to have to get out or I was going to have to change fields. So I ended up being what they call a flight engineer. A flight engineer gets on an airplane and they make sure the airplane stays flying. So you control the fuel, you control the hydraulics, you control the air conditioning, pressurization. You know, the pilots fly the airplane, but you make sure the airplane's capable of still being flown. And if things start to go wrong, it's up to you to figure out what to do about them to keep the airplane flying. That's what I enjoyed the most, because that required something other than just going out and turning a wrench. Now, turning a wrench is an important job, but I just felt like flight engineering was more important, at least in moving cargo, people, things like that.
So can you tell us some memorable experiences you had or events that stood out when you were in Air Force?
Okay, yeah. I had a experience, and most of my experiences that were most memorable were the ones flying, We had a mission to go out. We'd been on a regular mission, which was in the Pacific for Norton. Our mission, we landed at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and there was a guy who had been on an oil tanker for Texaco and had fallen and had massive internal injuries. Well, he was out at a little place called Diego Garcia out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. They needed him moved right away or he was going to die. There was no facilities out of Diego Garcia other than like a clinic. So the guy was hurt so bad he was going to die. So we flew all the way out there to Diego Garcia. It was about a 13-hour flight. Picked him up, him and 2 med techs, and flew him into Singapore. While we were going into Singapore, we ended up in a thunderstorm, really severe thunderstorm. The airplane was bouncing around a couple of thousand feet. You know, you'd be up here at 40,000, next thing you know, you'd be at 38,000, and then you'd be back up to 40, 41,000, just like this, you know, real hard jolts. And it was such a violent storm, there's a lot of static energy built up in it, so we ended up with St. Elmo's fire. You guys know what St. Elmo's is? It's static energy, electrical energy, and it's a really eerie green color, little less intense than his shirt. And it actually started out on windshields and then transitioned into the airplane and followed some handrails down and then made a jump to some static lines, which are what paratroopers go onto before they jump out of the airplane. It activates or shoots automatically, and followed down, and this poor guy in the back, he knew he was dying. You know, the devil or the angels were coming after him. He wasn't sure which, but he was able to see this green St. Elmo's fire trailing down those cables, and he was convinced they were coming to get him. Now, when it all happened, it just dissipated out the tail of the airplane, but it was probably the weirdest thing I've ever seen myself. And I could imagine a guy who was, I think his nationality was Filipino, working on an oil tanker. You know, I'm no idea really what was going through his head, but I'm sure it wasn't good. Another experience, we were hauling some Navy SEALs for some tactical work. One of the things we had to do with them is we had to go up to 25,000 feet and drop them out of the airplane. Now, people can't survive at 25,000 feet. That's too cold, not enough oxygen. You know, that's up there at Mount Everest height. So these guys were wearing supplemental oxygen and went out of the airplane with parachutes. They're trained to do that. To me, SEALs are, I don't know, they're just a different kind of person. Takes a lot to be a SEAL, a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication. And to me, jumping out of a perfectly good airplane never made sense to begin with. And these guys voluntarily jumped out of the airplane at 25,000 feet, you know, where it was bitter cold and, you know, wearing an oxygen suit. And at some point, we're going to have to activate their parachutes. Later on in the same trip, we were making an approach into Subic Bay, Philippines. And they were jumping out at night into the water with parachutes again. And then they were going to make an approach up their ships and put simulated mines on Navy ships without being spotted or detected. We made a pass and had to call it off because we lost the tracking device, and they were upset. I mean, they were coming in the cockpit and they were going to tell the pilot, what for? You don't do this to us. We're a go team. We want to go. You're not going around. Well, we ended up having to go around, came back, and they jumped out of the airplane again. And at night, you know, about 1,000 feet off the water, all you have to do is misjudge your altitude just a little bit, and you're not getting the chute open in time, and you hit water at that altitude, it's like hitting concrete. Different folks, you know, different kind of folks. Those are probably the 2 most memorable experiences I remember. Yeah. Fun times.
So what kind of friendships and, kind of friendships did you form while serving and with who?
I had a lot of different friendships. Probably some of the closest friendships I ever had was in Thailand, because I was over there without my family. I was married at the time, but I was over there without my family with just a bunch of guys and an open barracks. And we had a pretty close group there. In fact, it's one of the few times I think I've ever cried is when I left, because these guys were staying behind. And I never did see him again. We kept in contact for a while. There was James Avini and just a bunch of guys that really close. And then a bunch of guys when I was flying, but that was more professional, that kind of thing. But not as tight as a group in Thailand.
So how did you stay in touch with your family and friends back home?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. One is writing letters. Tape cassette players were out at that time. So, it was, most of us owned a tape player, and we'd make cassettes, send them home. And then there was a thing that ham operators operated. So you could call in, make an appointment. You could do that about once a month. Make an appointment to use a ham operator outfit there would be one operated by the base, then another operated in Alaska, another operated in Washington, and then they connect back up with the phone system in the United States to let you talk to your loved one for about 10 minutes. So, rather writing, tapes, and ham operators.
So what did you do for fun?
Went sightseeing. Got burned really bad because the water over in that part of Thailand at that time was just crystal clear, and you could see all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, which was about 50 feet. White sand. You get in there, you don't think about it. When you come out, you look like a lobster. Bright red and hurting everywhere. So I saw a lot of their national monuments. Probably one of the biggest things I saw when I was over there that really struck me was the bridge over the River Kwai. They actually made a movie about it. A bunch of British Army guys being captured by the Japanese in World War II, and they were building a bridge and a railroad through Burma at the time, which is Thailand. And to actually get to see that site and where the bullet holes had hit, things like that, where they tried to take the bridge out later. That was pretty impressive. And of course, seeing the elephants, wild elephants, things like that, you don't see those here in the States. So, just a lot of sightseeing when I had time, which I didn't have a lot of time, but when I did.
So where were you when the war ended?
I was in Thailand. I got there, and 4 months after I arrived in Thailand, the war officially ended. So I was still taking care of airplanes. I still had another, 4 months. I still had about another 9 months to go. So we were there winding things down. A lot of turning things over to the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese at the time, turning over airplanes to try and defend themselves with and things like that. And of course, we all know how that ended. They, when the U.S. forces moved out, they basically surrendered to the North Vietnamese. So I just got there about 4 months, sent some bombers out, sent some tankers out, sent some gunships out. And then the war ended. And then we had to figure out, okay, now what do we do? Well, the king of Thailand, we had an understanding with his government, he wasn't about to let us leave yet because he wanted our money. So we ended up staying my full tour there at least.
So how did you return home?
By airplane. They had an outfit called Flying Tigers at the time. And the name was a holdover, and it was actually started by a guy who was a Flying Tiger in Burma in World War II. And he started a cargo outfit and moved passengers, which happened to be all military. So basically anybody that had to go to Vietnam or go into Southeast Asia, Japan, any of those kind of countries, you got on Flying Tiger DC-8 and flew from the United States all the way to wherever you were going. In our case, I ended up initially in Bangkok. And then they took me from there and trucked me up to Utapao, which was not where I really wanted to be because I was supposed to be in Bangkok, which would have been good duty, but they needed me elsewhere. So Utapao is where I was.
how were you able to readjust to civilian life after the war?
Mine wasn't too bad because really I didn't get to see a lot of the war. I saw some corpses, in containers, but I didn't lose anybody that I was stationed with. I mean, we were safe. We were well within Thailand. We were away from Laos and Cambodia, so my return wasn't bad. Not near as bad as a lot of guys were. When we came back, we were told not to wear uniforms because Thailand wasn't popular. Or not Thailand, but Vietnam was not popular. So that was probably one of the biggest things. You go and do what you're told to do. You do what you think is right at the time, and you come back and no celebrations, no thank yous, things like that. That was probably some of the toughest. Like I said, I didn't have it bad because I wasn't really in the fighting. I was on a periphery of it. I was out there on the edge, but I didn't actually get involved in any of it. So for me, readjusting wasn't too bad, except coming back to the States and, you can't wear your uniform off base, that kind of thing.
So have you remained in contact with or reunited with any of your fellow veterans? If so, can you name any?
Oh yeah, I got a bunch of church now. We're veterans. We weren't stationed together. The guys I was in Thailand with, they're all over the United States. I got one that's up in Milwaukee, Gary Ross. I got another one that James Abini, he was out of New York. But I got a lot of friends who are veterans at my church that, we do things. Jerry Cowart is a good friend, and then Jim Hutchison. He's actually runs our safety team at church, things like that. They were all veterans. Another is Alan Prast. He was a 135 pilot. I was involved in 131s for a while, taking care of him. So I know a little bit about what he did and that kind of thing. So yeah, we're a lot of veteran friends. Yeah.
So are you a member of any veteran organizations, if so?
Yeah, I think if it's a veteran association, I belong to it. VFW, American Legion, Non-Commissioned Officer Association, Retired Sergeant Association. There's a bunch of different ones. Air Force Association. So, yeah.
So what have you done since separating from the military?
Well, I got out of the military and I went to work initially for a little outfit called the Flying Tigers Airlines. And I was a maintenance instructor there. I'd had enough maintenance time and knew airplanes well enough that they made me a maintenance instructor on DC-8s and 747, 727s for their mechanics. This is the same outfit, like I said, that derived initially from a guy who flew in World War II fighters in China. And he had started this airline. So I worked there for about a year until they got sold. And then I joined an outfit called TWA, Trans World Airlines. And I was actually a pilot instructor there, teaching young pilots how to be flight engineers. That was a job they were going into. And then teaching pilots things that have happened during the past year, what to do if their airplanes don't function correctly. So I did that for about 11 years. And then the last part of it, I was working for an outfit called Flight Safety International, teaching pilots and mechanics about their specific airplanes, how airplanes work, what to do if they don't work correctly, how to fix them if there's a problem, that kind of thing. So just about my entire adult life has been involved with airplanes in one way or another. It's been good, but I'm glad it's retired now. Yeah.
So what do young people like us need to know about the Vietnam War?
It was an unpopular war. A lot of guys didn't like it. We were in there for the wrong reason. Of course, young people didn't know that at the time. The military people didn't know that at the time. We were in there for financial purposes. That's basically what it amounted to. But you can't blame that on the veterans. The guys in the military are not told that kind of thing. They're told you got to do this to stop communism, which is what most of us are told. If we don't stop them in Vietnam, they'll be in Laos and Cambodia and Thailand and India and all the, well, they ended up there anyway, basically. A lot of people got killed, and it probably was not necessary. But you can't blame that on the guys who went and did the fighting. They were just doing what they thought was right because of what they'd been told. They need respect. You know, I don't really consider myself, even though I was in during that, a lot of that time, I really don't consider myself a Vietnam fighter because I wasn't involved in the fighting. I was in stateside sending ammo, sending weapons, sending people, that kind of thing. I was in Thailand for, like I said, the 4 months at the end of the war, but I really wasn't involved in the fighting like a lot of guys were. We got guys out there like the people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, PTSD people, we still got those from Vietnam. And a lot of those guys are living on the streets and things like that, and it's not how you're supposed to treat people who do what you tell them to do and ask them to put their lives on the line and then you just throw them away. Vietnam, part of our history probably won't go down very well. But you can't blame that on the veterans, especially the ones who went and did the actual fighting and dying, watching their friends die.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added into the interview? So what?
Well, I just brought some toys here. This is a 141, which you won't see anymore unless you go to a museum somewhere. Okay, this is what I flew on. I was an engineer, so the pilot sat right up here in the very front of the airplane, and I was side saddle. I looked out a side window when I looked at all, because that's where my control panel was. This thing would handle both paratroopers, cargo. You could offload cargo on the ground or in flight. A lot of our stuff we did what we call airdrops. Container delivery system or heavy equipment. I've dropped anything from trucks to survival packs and things like that. It'd haul about 165 paratroopers. And a lot of times that's what we do, is we take paratroopers and drop them out on borders. You know, we had several exercises. One was over in Germany, and we dropped a lot of paratroopers right on the Russian border, you know, with East Germany and stuff like that, to let them know just how fast we could get several thousand troops on the ground over there, that kind of thing. But then drop supplies to them when they need it and things like that. And then you'd carry about 200 non-combat troops. So sailors, people like that, we could haul that many people in there. Airplane flew at about 45,000 feet. Nice airplane. But now they're all soda cans, cat food cans, stuff like that. Although you can see one right over here at Scott if you go over just outside the gate. That air park, they got one of those different colors. When I first went in, they were all silver. Then they went to white and gray. And then this, which is the lizard color, they call it, because that was supposed to allow it to blend in with jungle. And then, of course, they got the grays now, which are, well, that was the last version, the gray, which was supposed to be, you know, it'd do well over water, do well on sand and things like that, because it was a real dull gray color. So that's the airplane that I spent most of my career on, either fixing it or flying it. And you won't see those anymore except in museums. And then this was presented to me when I was retiring. This is the highest decoration I ever received. It's called the Meritorious Service Medal. Okay. I'll just hand that around. And then this was given to me by my squadron. It shows the different devices I wore. Now our stripes were a little different than what you'll see now on the streets. Okay. the highest rank I received was what they called an E7 Master Sergeant. And that was 6 stripes all down, sort of rocker fashion. And now they got 5 stripes down with a rafter. I think they're trying to take after the Marines or something. I'm not sure there. A lot of things changed since I've been in. I was part of what they call the Military Airlift Command, which now is called the Air Mobility Command. So after I retired, everything changed. Okay, the outfit I was in, the 63rd Military Airlift Wing, 14th Military Airlift Squadron, both of those have been deactivated. They no longer exist anywhere except in people's memories. Okay, and as I said, now it's called Air Mobility Command instead of the Military Airlift Command. But that's not unusual. Before I came in, it was called MATS, Military Air Transport Group. So you have different things. The yellow and blue medal up there is the Air Force Commendation Medal. I got a couple of those. Then the next highest one over there is the what they call the Combat Readiness Medal. Since I could drop paratroopers, I flew in an airplane that could drop paratroopers, cargo, stuff like that. We were considered strategic airlift. In other words, we were able to deliver right up to the front lines if we had to. And that's what a lot of that dropping things on the border with East Germany, and we dropped people down in Honduras to warn off the Nicaraguans and things like that. So we go and drop people to show just how fast, if things escalated, we could be there and have people on the ground pretty quickly. The next medal down here is that's one you get for just being in the service and not getting in trouble. The Air Force Good Conduct Medal. So as long as you don't do anything really bad, you'll get one of those. Then the National Defense Service Medal. That's when you've been in the service during combat at any time. So since I was in during Vietnam, I got that. My sons have got them for being in Iraq and Afghanistan, things like that. And then this one over here is a pretty nice one. That's Humanitarian Service Medal. I got that for helping bring people back from Vietnam, specifically Vietnamese who were fleeing the North Vietnamese. They were basically refugees. So I got that for helping bring people back into the States. Okay. Then of course my aircrew badge for being an engineer. Then over here are my maintenance badges for when I was a mechanic. And then down across the bottom there, of course, my different ranks throughout my service in the Air Force. So other than that, no. Just told to bring some of that stuff because maybe you guys like to see some of it. Spent 3 years in the Strategic Air Command, which sort of like being in the Marines almost. You were a body, not a person in SAC at the time. Military Airlift Command, a little bit different. That's where I spent most of my time. That's where I was happiest, was in that, helping people. A lot of our missions, we would haul people back who had been injured, things like that. So it was sort of nice being able to get them home and get them help. Okay.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
Military service is good. Helps people grow up. I know when I went out of high school, I really had no idea what I was going to do. I tried college for a while and decided it wasn't for me because I really didn't know, okay, what do I focus on? I wanted to be a vet, then I wanted to be a pilot, then I wanted to be a police officer. Then that's how most people start college. They don't have a true idea of what they're doing. You'll run into it, and you probably have. People go in thinking they're going to do one degree, and they'll change their mind 3 or 4 times. And that's why sometimes you 5 or 6 years down the road before you get your degree, because you change your mind that many times. Military helps you decide that. You get in, you mature, you're left up to your own to do things. I mean, you do have guidance, but most of the time they'll tell you, okay, this is how we would like to see it done, but get it done, whatever it takes to get that done. So the military helps you mature, I think. It returns service to your country. Without military, we wouldn't be the United States. And we got 5 military branches. A lot of people don't think about them, but the Coast Guard. That's the branch that defends our borders on both the west and east and south coast of the United States. Without them, you know, we could have had people in here that shouldn't have been here a long time ago. And then the Marines and the Air Force and the Navy and the Army, you gotta have those people. People need to return what they've been given in some extent. Now, it doesn't have to be military service. You know, they could do work for the schools. You know, teachers, I got a lot of respect for teachers. They put up with a lot of stuff, not overly well paid, you know, but you have to have the military people too. Firefighters, policemen, all those people. So I think you need to return service to your country somehow. You know, you could always be worse off. Just go to Mexico, go to Thailand where I was, go to Vietnam. A lot of countries, what we call third world, because they truly are. People living in shacks, wondering where their next meal's coming from. You know, they don't have pets over there. That dog they have on the end of the leash is supper. Because you don't have food if you don't eat the dog. That kind of thing. So I think if you join the military or something like that, you see how the other part of the world lives and just how good you have it here. So I think you ought to repay it somehow. Not necessarily military service. You could do other things. You know, there's organizations that go do good things in other countries. But they represent the United States when they do that. So I just think you ought to return it somehow and say thank you. I know I've got it good. Thanks. It may not seem good right now. You're young. But at some point you'd see just how good it is. I mean, you can see it on the news if you watch enough of the news and see, you know, people being blown to death in Bangladesh and even in London, France, places like that anymore. You know, well, here in the United States, it can be bad. So give a little something back for everything you got.
All right, lastly, do you guys have any questions for Mr. Anderson?
I do. How was the interaction with the other, like the citizens of Thailand? Like,
We were good, I think, for the most part. I don't know how it would have been if I got you know, the further you get away from the base, the better off you are. Military from any country really don't interact very well with the local people. For some reason, a lot of times we get to thinking we're better than they are. And we show it in a lot of cases. You know, you're still living in a hut, ha 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 ha, that kind of stuff, you know. I got a 3-bedroom home back in the States. I go back there, you know, I got money, I got a car, and these people don't, you know, they're walking and they're living in a hut and that kind of thing. So I think the further away you can get from the base, the better you are with the people, as long as you try and treat them with respect. You got to know their local customs. You know, one of their biggest insults was you to reach out and touch them without being invited to, or showing them the bottom of your feet. That was considered, you know, especially if you pointed them at their face or their head, because up here is where the person is. They know that. That's where the mind is. You're telling me that my mind is not as good as the bottom of your feet if you're showing your feet to them. So you need to know the customs. You need to treat the people good. And for the most part, I think as far as the Thai people were concerned, we were on good terms for the most part. You just have to treat them with the same respect you want them to treat you with. But that's true of anywhere. Anybody else?
So you had like combat training, right? Before
Mhm.
you were sent. Were there any times when you were like not had to, but like were like almost I don't know how to word it. Were there times where you was there a chance for you to use your combat skills, like
No, luckily, no. A lot of times I carried a weapon, especially when I started flying. And I'll never forget one of the thought, I'm not sure what they were thinking, but we went to Khartoum in Sudan. And right off the edge of it over there were part of the People Liberation Army. And I'm carrying a snub-nose 38 with 6 shots. 3 hollow points and 3 birdshot rounds. These guys got AK-47s and stuff. Now, why I had to wear my gun exposed while I was there, I have no idea. I guess it's supposed to make some kind of statement, but you know, if they came at me with AK-47, I'd be better off probably just throwing the pistol at them, because, you know, snub nose, you can't hit that wall over here from here anyway with most of them, you know. So, luckily I never had to. Now, I did get put through some prisoner of war training, indoctrination, how to try and resist it if I was ever captured, especially once I started flying. And that was very, very enlightening as to what they'll do to you and can do to you. And sometimes if the psychiatrists and what all were not paying attention, sometimes they would do to people. So, but no, luckily I never had to harm anyone. Most of my time was spent trying to help people, hauling guys who've been shot, hurt, burned, other things like that, luckily. So no, I don't have the problems a lot of vets do have that have actually done that. Thank God. Anybody else?
I have another one.
Okay.
Do you remember any events that kind of showed disrespect to veterans coming home from Vietnam at the time when you were coming home?
Yeah. There were some bad things. Not uncommon to have people walk up to you and call you murderer, you know, child killer, woman raper. Some vets had feces thrown on them. You know, that's why they told you not to wear your uniform when you came back. Don't do that, because there were people out there who do everything they could to show disrespect for what you'd done. So yeah, there was some of that. That's why I like to see what's happened with the guys coming, you know, the folks, men and women that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Luckily, the people are showing them a lot of respect and a lot of love when they come back. From the Vietnam era, the guys didn't get that. You know, there's basically 2 forgotten wars, Korea and Vietnam. And I guess you can't really, well, Korea was a war. Vietnam was never a war, it was a police action. So that's where we saw some of the problems with that. But yeah, there's a lot of disrespect for the folks coming back from Vietnam, a lot of it. Anybody else? I'm here for you. I got all morning. Okay.
I know you named some of the memorable. Yeah. But what is some of the worst memories you've ever had?
One of the worst is hauling back a 3-year-old child who had died and bringing his parents back. They were stationed in the Philippines, and the child had died, and we were bringing the whole family back to the United States. That stuff. You start seeing little tiny boxes, you know, little coffins, that kind of thing. Hauling back an Army guy that had been shot by one of his own buddies. I don't know what happened, but one guy, they were on a train, they were in separate tanks, and the one guy swiveled his turn around, let the other guy have it point blank with a shell from one tank to the other. And this guy was so burned, I doubt if he survived. But we had to take him home and listen to him scream the whole time. I mean, they couldn't give him enough medication because of the burns. So, yeah.
What was one of the like happier memories you had in Thailand? Like, what did you enjoy about it?
In Thailand, the guys I was living with, without a doubt, we became like a family. That's probably the tightest I had in Thailand. I got to see some sites, but, you know, our work week was typically 6 days, 12 hours a day. So, you know, if you got a break, like, you know, you're allowed to leave for a weekend because they wouldn't let you go home. If you were allowed to leave for a weekend, then you scooted off and tried to see some of the sites. You know, I got to see some of Bangkok and some of those more memorable sites, but the big thing was the people. You get a real close bond when you're living with each other and depending on each other for, you know, just camaraderie. You know, a lot of the Thai people that worked on base, you got to know them, but they weren't friends. They knew you were going to leave, so they didn't want to form any permanent attachments. But the guys you live in the barracks with, yeah, that was good. You don't have any questions at all? Just sit back here, watch the camera. Okay. Anybody else?
So, what are some life lessons you learned from the military service?
Life lessons? You got to make sure that you take care of you and your family. A lot of people don't do that. You know, a lot of people, they expect things to be given. They expect the kids to go out and make it on their own without guidance and things like that. In the military, you learn there is guidance. You know, you're taught that from day one. You step in, okay, here's how you do it. Now I expect you to go do that, but I'm not going to be sitting there watching you, but I've shown you how, so you go do that. And I think that we need more of that. You know, that, so a skill. You know, I learned how to fix airplanes, how to fly airplanes. So something that I could come out of the military with. I stayed 20 years. A lot of guys get out in 4, 5 years. One of my sons did that. He stayed in for 8 and then he got out. And he's got a job that he does now. Same job he did in the military, but he's civilian. So, you know, coming out with some kind of skill, I think. You know, the OJT instead of college. College is not a bad thing. OJT is critical too, though. You know, you can get a lot of book learning, but unless you know what to do with it, and you get a chance to actually do it, you really don't have a clue how a lot of things work. So, coming out with a life skill, I think, was a big thing. Anybody? No?
What advice do you have to this generation to serve our country, like to give back? What should be?
A lot of ways. You can get in the military, fireman, doctor, nurse, teacher. You know, there's organizations that volunteer and go to other countries and help for a limited amount of time to help other nations that don't have the same capabilities we do to help people. There's all kinds of ways. I just think you need to do something. You know, just to sit back and take all the time and not giving back, I think is a big problem. You got to give back some. You got to let the people know, hey, I appreciate what you guys have provided. You know, you've given me an upbringing. You've given me some kind of skill. Here's my time to help back, just like you've helped me grow up. So I think that's one of the big things. And it doesn't have to be the military nowadays. There's lots of ways to do it. Your teacher's a good example. I got a lot of respect for teachers. They, you know, people don't understand. They think, well, a teacher, you know, 9 months and then they get a paid vacation for 3 months. No. If you ever watch what a teacher do, I mean, I've come from a family of teachers and they're still going to school. They have to do lesson plans. They have to do extracurricular activities with the kids. It means being a teacher is a full-time job. I got a lot of respect for them. So being a teacher would be a good way to give back. Just a lot of ways to give back, but I think we all need to give back somehow. It doesn't have to be something that's going to put our life at risk necessarily, but something to provide outreach for our communities that we live in. Yeah.
Do you regret anything? Like, did you have any moments where you regretted going to the military?
Not that I regret it, except for basic training, of course. Everybody regrets basic training. Because, I got on the bus and the guy says, how many of you believe this is a democracy? And we all raised our hands. And he said, not anymore. You've just joined the biggest dictatorship in the world. So, initially that learning to be self-reliant, not having mom and dad to turn to anymore, that kind of thing. I think everybody, you're scared. You realize all of a sudden that there's nobody to fall back on who can help you anymore. It's you make it, because these guys that are in charge of you, they're there to help you make it, but if you fail, that's not their problem. So I think that first 4 to 6 weeks of trying to make it, that was scary. Was I disappointed? No. Scared? Yeah. For about the first 4 weeks or so, because the DI doesn't even want to know your first name. He knows your last name because that's all he calls you. That and some other thing sometimes. But he doesn't want to know your first name until you're getting ready to leave and go out further. And then all of a sudden I walk up and say, well done, John. That kind of thing. But for that first 4 weeks or so of your basic training, you're a non-entity. You're a person they're responsible for, and they really don't want the responsibility. So that's tough. As far as the military itself, no. No, I needed it at the time. I think a lot of people, like I said, do need direction of some kind. Help me figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. So bad times just at the very beginning, and just from being a kid trying to grow up. I mean, we all hit that. We all walk out after 12 years of school, and okay, what do I do now? And that's a scary time. A scary time because, you can't live at home all the time. You gotta go out, you gotta make a living, you gotta bring your own family up and stuff like that. That's scary. Until you do it. Anybody else?
So how old were you when you first joined the military, and then?
I was 18. 18 when I joined it. I was 38 when I retired. So I was still a kid. I'd had a little time between high school because I graduated a semester early. Like I said, I went out and I was a draftsman for United States Steel for about 6 months. And I was at that age group and that, I was on the draft. I had my draft card, I was A1, and I was going to be drafted. With my particular last name, starting with an A, I was right there, I was within the first 10 that was going to be drafted. And my dad told me a very simple truth. He says, I don't know of a job yet where they pay you to carry a rifle through a rice paddy. You need to go into the Navy or the Air Force, and I chose the Air Force because I don't like water. I like drinking water, but I don't want, I swim like a rock, straight. They tell me everybody can float. No. John doesn't float. I sink like a rock. So, okay. That it? Okay. All right then. Well, thank you. Thanks for the interview. I appreciate it.